Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us for our Wellness Matters talk this evening. Our topic this evening is Your Teen and Their Anxiety with Courtney Hooper. My name is Nicole Imgrand and I'm the owner and director of Rivers Edge Counseling Center. And the webinar tonight is part of a series that we have that's long-standing for us as a team. The past 8 years, we do 1 or 2 talks a month. And this past year, we've been hosting them as webinars as part of our commitment to community service. And it's become just also very enjoyable highlight of my month to be able to connect with people in our community. And so I'm really grateful that you're all here. We have 2 more talks actually coming up in the next few weeks. So I hope you'll check out our website and those titles. And in a few weeks, we'll also release our whole series for the fall and winter. And we'll have about 15 talks coming up for next year as well. So check that out. Our talk today is going to be about 45 minutes. And then following that, we'll have a Q&A with Courtney. Throughout the talk, I'll be monitoring the chat. So if you have any technical issues or comments that you just want to pass along, you can put them in there. You can also post questions in the Q&A screen, and we will address them all at the end. I will just take a moment to introduce our facilitator for today. Courtney is a practicum student in our program at Rivers Edge, and we've been fortunate enough to have her on our team and serving our clients since September. Courtney has just finished her program and graduated with her Master's of Arts in Counseling Psychology through Yorkville University. She moved into her counseling career after 10 years as a teacher, ranging from teaching grade 6 to PUF-funded kindergarten classroom. She loves to work with children and families and hopes to continue to support them in her new role as a therapist. Courtney has her own teen at home who will be 14 in October, and she will be very busy because she is also excited to welcome a baby girl in early August of this year. And so with all of that experience and professionally and in life, I really look forward to what you have to offer us, Courtney, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. I'm excited to do this for my first time, so I hope it all goes well and that it's useful for everyone. First, I'd like to acknowledge that here in St. Albert, we are on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional lands of our First Nations and Métis people. And as treaty people, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, we share the responsibility for stewardship of this beautiful land. So with that being said, I did put together this presentation geared towards parents. I'm not sure everybody who's joined us tonight, what your background is, what you're hoping to get out of tonight. So let me just share my screen and we can take a look at kind of the agenda for the night. So hopefully everybody can see this okay. We're going to start just by reviewing a little bit of our introduction, but what is anxiety? We'll clarify that. We'll talk about the adolescent brain and the stress response, the opposite to that, which is the relaxation response, the CBT model, kind of the therapeutic approach that we would take if you decide that that's a route you want for your teen, and the cycle of anxiety, and then of course how to help, some strategies and techniques that we know work well. So again, it's my hope that to bring you some new insights, some information, maybe understanding to your role as parents, supporting your teen's development, specifically in terms of anxiety. So with that being said, let's get started. What is anxiety? Well, we know that anxiety is a mental and a physical reaction to a perceived threat. So, in small doses, anxiety is helpful. It can protect us from danger. It can help us focus our attention on problems and even create safety. But when anxiety gets too severe or happens too often, it can be a problem in our daily lives. Here's a list of many different reactions, physical and mental reactions that we can have to anxiety. So our thoughts are also impacted. It's not just that physical reaction, but things like uncontrollable worry, poor concentration, memory difficulties, learning skills are impacted, our decision making abilities are impacted, communication, and more. As you can see, this isn't a comprehensive list, but it's one that we kind of work off of and understand as some very common anxiety symptoms. So anxiety, it can be general. In general, we can worry about things, of course, too much, like schoolwork, expectations, finances. It can also come in the form of a phobia. So that being, something more specific, an object, like a spider or heights, something that is out of proportion to the actual threat that's being involved. Giving speeches might be one of them, or speaking to a large group. In more extreme forms, anxiety can also escalate to panic, where an individual can have a panic attack. Numerous symptoms like that are like listed here are included in panic attacks, including being overwhelmed by dread. I've even heard some clients state that they feel like they're going to have a heart attack, or they're hyperventilating. They can't slow their breathing down. Their speech might speed up. Um, so that being said, where does anxiety come from? Well, we know that it can be genetically passed down. So that being said, like it could run in the family. Maybe you've experienced some anxiety as parents, meaning that your child might have been born just with, an extra sensitive system that perceives threats more easily. Or there's another way, past experiences can also increase or cause our anxiety. Getting teased or bullied when you're younger can make you really uncomfortable talking to new people when you're older. Having a bad experience at the dentist, this one is me, that can make you fear going to the dentist in the future. Things at home, maybe things weren't so great for you growing up, or there was a tough time at home, and that could put a lot of pressure on you or your teen, causing some anxiety. And sometimes even witnessing things in life can make us anxious of something, like witnessing somebody almost drown could cause us to be really scared of water. So teens, let's make sure that we're talking about the same group. We identify teens or adolescents as children, well, youth, age 13 to 19 years old. Any things that happen in this time, many things happen in this time frame, actually. Puberty, there's a shift in social influence, physical growth, changes in the brain. These are just a few of those changes that are happening. Emotions and connections change, and teens actually start to turn outwards towards their peer groups. Instead, for their modeling and for feedback to fit in. They wanted to develop that identity with their peers. That's a shift away from the family unit, and kind of like in the earlier stages of life when they would look to mom or dad. Well, now they're looking towards their peer groups. So, if you read the slide here, imagine having this need, this developmental desire to be reaching out to your peers, but now we're socially distanced, we're isolated. Schools from grade 7 to 12 just were mandated to be home for the next 2 weeks. So I don't know about your household, but it wasn't great news here. And it's a bit of a struggle to keep them socially active and having these good experiences right now, especially. So this being said, we've covered a bit of anxiety. We know the age group we're talking about. I want to talk a little bit about their brain development and what's going on. So bear with me a little bit. I do have a video to kind of help us expand a little bit more on their brain development at this time. So as far as their brain goes, science shows that, in adolescence, they're going through a process. This process involves the collection of what's already been learned, and then they get rid of what they don't use, and they strengthen all of those connections that are left over. So basically, to use a metaphor, as the brain matures, it combines all the letters that it learned in childhood and makes them into words and sentences and paragraphs that make sense to our teens. So any letters that aren't being used in those sentences and paragraphs being formed get pruned away. They get just put away because they're not being used. So the ones that do stay create these really strong, fast connections that our teens use in the future. So why is this important? Maybe you're asking. Well, at this point in times, our teens aren't actually working with letters and words and sentences to form those networks. They're working with emotions and these executive functions that form cognitive and emotional networks. So this happens in the prefrontal cortex, right here in their brain. This is the spot underneath our foreheads. Um, we all have it. It's being developed in teen years. And this part of the brain is responsible for a lot of different things. So let's take a quick look. They say that there's technically 9 here: empathy, insight, responsible flexibility, emotional regulation, body regulation, morality, intuition, communication, and the ability to modulate fear. So then, I mean, when you think about it, if these are all the things being developed in adolescence, well, what does this have to do with anxiety? Well, first, I think it would be really beneficial for us to watch this really short video. It's about 2.5 minutes. It's by Daniel Siegel. He's a clinical professor of psychiatry at the UCLA School of Medicine and executive director of the Mindsight Institute. He works a lot with teens and basically has a clearer kind of visual. I'm a visual learner, so I hope that this is helpful for you too.
The adolescent period is absolutely amazing. People often give it a negative approach, saying, oh, it's a time where adolescents are going to lose their mind, or they're just immature, or raging hormones drive them crazy. These are all not only wrong, but they're myths that mislead us and actually disempower us. Whether we're adults or adolescents, they actually give us the wrong message, and they make it so there's nothing we can do. So what is actually the truth? The truth is that instead of raging hormones, what's happening is we have remodeling in the brain in ways we never could have predicted. We now understand 2 big things are happening in the brain, things you as an adult can support adolescents in developing well. And if you're an adolescent, you actually can use this to help your brain grow in an optimal way. What are those 2 things? The brain is pruning itself. So imagine that in childhood, you're growing like a tree and establishing all these branches and all these leaves are growing. In the brain, that means connections among the basic cell, the neuron, called synapses, are being established, and you're soaking in the knowledge of the world, and that's beautiful. The tree is just growing, growing, growing. But then what happens that surprised everyone is the brain begins to prune itself. You start carving away some of those leaves, some of the smaller branches, even some of the larger branches. And the reason for the pruning is to specialize the brain. While the child is developing in ways that are really generalized, learning everything they can about everything they can, an adolescent is going to begin to find their passion, to actually find things they like, things they really love doing, and to drive their development in that way. So pruning is actually a use it or lose it principle underneath it. That if you don't use something, you're going to lose it. So if you like sports or like dancing or like music, do those things so you continue to establish those circuits. The second thing that happens in the remodeling adolescent brain is myelin formation. Myelin is a healthy sheath that allows connected neurons to communicate with each other in a much more effective way. How? It's 100 times faster, the signal that's sent down a neuron to communicate with another neuron, 100 times faster, and after it fires off, it's 30 times shorter, the resting period that happens. 30 times 100 is 3,000. So when you've put down myelin, you've made your neurons communicate 3,000 times more effectively. That's a great thing.
Okay. So I hope that kind of
Now, the great thing
sorry.
too.
I just want to switch slides here. I hope that kind of helps to explain um, the example that I was using. Um, that the adolescent brain is under construction, basically. They're working to create these building systems in their brain to deal with the world around them. While these changes are occurring, certain systems now become more activated. So one that we know for sure is the hormonal system. And I mean, hormones, teens, right? We know this. And our teens then tend to have this experience of negative and wildly fluctuating moods, which I mean, can be really unpredictable to us adults. So once, they're more activated or their hormones are triggered, we're talking about a different part of the brain. So I wanted to go back just really briefly to show you this slide one more time while we're talking about it. The brain. So we can see here, we talked about the prefrontal cortex. This is the part of the brain that our adolescents are developing. And when the hormone system kicks in, we actually start talking about this other part of the brain here, the limbic brain, or depending on what kind of therapy you're doing, we have a few different names for this part of the brain. But it's really about fight, flight, or freeze. It's about emotions. It's acting off of feelings, not rationalized thought like the prefrontal cortex does. So when faced with like a trigger or this hormonal system engages in our teens, it sends them into this, what we call a stress response, which is the fight, flight, or freeze that is shown here in this image. This is important when we talk about and learn about anxiety, because we really want to know what is triggering our teens, even though it's so unpredictable to us as adults. It's important for us to be aware of that if we want to help them through their anxiety. So I do have one more short video to show you and share. And this is actually a great one to share with your teen if it's something that you want to talk to them about or are open about. I've used it in sessions. I've even used it in one of my teen anxiety groups. So hopefully you'll find this one helpful as well. It explains that fight, flight, or freeze response in a little bit more detail, and it includes what we've just learned about the brain as well.
You know what anxiety feels like. We all do. Everyone experiences anxiety in some way or another. It's something that connects all of us together. Why we feel anxiety and what it really is, that may surprise you. Without anxiety, we'd all be in serious trouble. As soon as your brain senses you're in danger, a little piece of it, called the amygdala, kicks in. It gets your body ready to react. That could mean fight, run away, or shut down. It's called the fight, flight, or freeze response. This reaction goes back millions of years to our distant animal ancestors. Animals whose amygdalae were more sensitive to danger were more likely to stay alive and off the menu. Over millions of generations, this developed into the system we all know as anxiety. So you see, anxiety itself is not all bad. But when there's no immediate life or death threat, and your amygdala keeps telling your body that you're in danger, that's when anxiety becomes a problem. Your amygdala doesn't know the difference between getting eaten and public speaking or failing a test. Human society has only existed for a relatively short time. It's messy and complicated and confusing, and our amygdalae just haven't had time to catch up. So sometimes, when we're in uncomfortable situations, our brains misread the risk and overreact. Our hearts beat faster and we breathe heavily, pulling more oxygen into our bodies. The muscles in our arms and legs tense up and fill with blood. Our skin perspires to cool us down. This would all be great if we needed to fight or run, but instead, we just feel tense and sweaty. Sometimes our minds go blank and we feel like we can't move or talk. That would be great if we needed to hide. Instead, we just feel stuck. When things trigger our anxiety, sometimes we try to avoid them, like our ancestors avoiding a predator. But that can cause problems when those triggers are important parts of life, like going to school or meeting new people, things that won't just give up and go away. So how does knowing all this help? Well, it starts with remembering what's really going on. There's nothing physically wrong with you. It's just your amygdala trying to tell you it thinks you're in danger, even if it gets confused about how much danger you're really in. Understanding why we feel anxiety is an important step in learning to manage it.
Okay. So I'm hopeful that that was kind of tying this all together. Now we'll look at this image one last time, I promise. But this was just to highlight that, once we are working off of this amygdala part of the brain in fight, flight, or freeze, we've been triggered. We think that there's danger. Your teen thinks that there is a threat. They maybe don't know what it is, but their body is physically responding to this threat. And that being said, they lose all access to this front part. There's actually a hormone, cortisol, is responsible in the system for shutting that part off for survival purposes. Like the video said, it has a purpose. Your body's doing what it's supposed to do. It's just really unhelpful at this time. So that being said, our teens, knowing that their front part of their brain here is still developing, they're more liable, or really it's more common for them to act off of this part of the brain, their limbic part in their amygdala, which means that they're acting off of emotions and feelings. That's where they make their choices from. That's why maybe their choices aren't rational or they don't make sense to us as adults, because they're operating off of a very primitive part of their brain while the more complex parts are still developing. So that was the stress response. Now, I think it's really important for us to address the relaxation response. That's when we can calm the mind and body enough to stop that fight, flight, or freeze response so that we can be at rest. I don't know if this image is familiar to any of you, but my son ends up getting, I don't even remember what we called it, but you can tell he's had his earphones on for far too long when he comes out of his room and he's been listening to music or playing his game. So that's kind of, a teen is going to have a variety of different ways to relax. And so that's kind of something that I'll encourage you a bit later to explore with them. The relaxation response is actually, again, the opposite to the stress response. It's scientific, it has scientific names, but both of them are a part of our nervous system. So we activate one of them to have the opposite effect of the other. So when we do have a stress response, we know our heart rate is increased, our blood pressure is increasing. There's a lot of different things happening in the body. Anxiety, digestion goes down. Our immune system is even less effective. So when we engage in the relaxation response, the exact opposite of these things start to happen. So instead of the fight, flight, or freeze, we would call this rest and digest, where we can actually find somewhere to rest. So what activities can signal this in our teens' bodies? Well, there's many, and it really just depends on what you've tried, what speaks to your teen. But here's a really brief list. There's breath work, and I included a very simple image here of breath work, but this would be used in maybe a younger child or a younger teen. But shape breathing, where you can use the finger to trace and actually draw the shapes out while you're breathing. A lot of my clients have found it helpful to have that more physical piece to their breath, but breathing in for 3, hold for 3, and out for 3. And repeating this over and over again. There's many different types of breath work out there, so I won't waste our time in going through all of that. But finding what works best, again, is what is most important. So meditation is another one. Mindfulness. I do go into mindfulness in a little bit of detail here because I think that there's a little bit of clarification needed. It's not as mystical as maybe it appears to be. So another strategy that I've used in the past has been change in temperature, grabbing some ice, putting it on your neck, going outside, having a hot shower or even a cold shower. But changing your temperature kind of gets you to check back into your body, bring you back to the here and now. Aromatherapy, that can really help with bringing you back into your senses. Yoga, progressive muscle relaxation. Now, this is an activity too. I won't take our time tonight to do it with you, but it's basically about training the body to tense and relax. And you can isolate each muscle group until you've gone through your whole body. There's lots of guided meditations about progressive muscle relaxation that are super helpful, especially before sleep when you can't stop your mind from racing. And then for our teens, obviously music is a really good one. And grounding. I don't have it on here, but a grounding exercise, there's lots of them. And that's basically what some of these are doing. Aromatherapy, yoga, PMR. They want to bring you back, your teen back into their bodies, into the here and now. Just like in the video when it said the key to all this is remembering where you are. Is there actually this threat that you're perceiving, or are you safe in the moment? How is your breath? Are you breathing too fast? Are you breathing too slow? Typically, you'll be breathing too fast if you're having this anxiety reaction or this stress response. So then being able to slow it down. Breath is really key in a lot of this work. That's why it's included in yoga. Controlling the breath controls our whole system and can regulate your whole body. So how can we help our teens get into this state of relaxation? Well, co-regulation is a really great one. That can work really well for younger teens. But co-regulation happens when our body helps their body rest. It can happen in a hug. It can happen being nearby. It can happen just from being present and through eye contact. Another one is modeling. If you are sitting there close to your teen and maybe they're not super touchy anymore, I'm not allowed to touch my son's hair anymore. So I model. And if I can start just taking deep breaths and do my own breath work to stay calm. And then through that modeling, it kind of gets picked up and your teen might start to take those deeper breaths and slow their breath down. We can prompt them to keep a schedule or a routine of some of these activities, whether it's meditation or practicing mindfulness, yoga, and encouraging them to take some time for themselves from whatever, especially what they find stressful, like school or extracurriculars, finding work or work. Collaboration is a really big one, working with your teen. So maybe not coming in with all the answers, but really being open to what they're open to or what they want to try or can try. And then I wanted to kind of challenge you guys to self-reflect a little bit and ask yourself how often it is that you might engage in some of these activities. How often are you in the relaxation response? And do you model that at home? So I grabbed this off of a website online, therapistaid.com. I use it a lot when I work with families and teens. What is mindfulness? Well, it's this non-judgmental awareness of what's happening in the present moment. It includes the awareness of our own thoughts, feelings, and senses. So this is what basically helping to stop that stress response is doing. It's bringing us back into our bodies, into the here and now. So when I work with a teen or even an adult who's experiencing symptoms of anxiety, one of the first things I do is bring awareness to their symptoms. So what is going on? Notice your thoughts, notice your feelings. What are some of the sensations that are happening for you? Um, in mindfulness, and specifically for like meditation and being mindful, it's not the purpose to clear your mind and stop thinking, but it's to become aware of what you are thinking about. How are you feeling? And not getting lost in them. I've used the metaphor in the past of, sitting down and watching, maybe you're on a bus and you can see all these thoughts passing you every day. And sometimes they speed up and there's a lot of them going by. You don't need to jump into each one and pick it apart and ask it questions and analyze it. It's okay to just let it go by. So then there's the acceptance piece of things, that is kind of like, yeah, it's there, and we keep letting it go by. But sometimes even being able to say that, yeah, I noticed I'm feeling nervous. The end. We don't need to ask, why are we feeling nervous? How can we stop this? How long have you felt nervous for? But just being okay with that being the statement. There's many benefits to mindfulness, not just these 6, but it is a proven approach to reduce symptoms of anxiety and depression. It can improve your memory, your focus, mental processing speed, even help you to adapt to stressful situations. You can have better satisfaction in relationships. This reduced rumination, that's kind of what I was talking about with being able to not jump into every thought that passes by and mull it over and over and over again. And it can even improve your ability to manage emotions. So when we think about the teen's brain right now and that it is acting off of emotion, why wouldn't we want to improve that for them? And this is a proven approach to improve that. So there's lots of different ways to practice mindfulness. These are just 4 examples. There's meditation, where lots of guided ones again online can be really helpful. There's tons of apps for this stuff now, especially since the start of the pandemic. You can do a body scan, taking inventory of how you're feeling. A mindfulness walk is something I love doing. Or you can encourage your teen to do it too, where you don't just go for a walk, but you notice what's around you. You notice the smells, you notice the birds. What do you hear? What do you see? What do you feel? Really bringing back to the 5 senses, especially for some of the grounding exercises. So this is one that I've done in session and in group, where you name 5 things you see. Maybe you can try it right now. I won't be able to see you. But just as you're sitting where you're at tonight, can you name 5 things that you can see right now? What are 4 things you can feel? How about 3 things you can hear? 1 thing you can taste? And 1 thing you can smell? So if you notice that your teen is maybe like speaking fast or feeling anxious or breathing fast, that's a prompt that you could use to help, bring them back into their body. Ask them, can you check in with your body and name me that, do that exercise. So I wanted to also kind of address and talk about the cognitive behavioral model. This is the most widely used and evidence-based approach to treating anxiety in the therapy room. So I'm not going to suggest that you participate in much of this, but your understanding of it could really help you to wrap your head around what's going on for your teen. So it shows over here the situation. And, a situation is anything that happens to a person. Ultimately, these situations are out of our control. We can only control how we react. And our reaction or our response is based on our thoughts and our emotions about that. So in this instance, we imagine the situation is actually a trigger. And this trigger could be anything from maybe it's having to go to school, that your teen's really anxious about going to school. So the thought or belief about going to school could be something bad's going to happen. I'm going to embarrass myself. I'm not going to do well on my test today. And those emotions involved with that thought could be, low self-worth or guilt or fear. Emotions are very complex. So once we have these thoughts and emotions tied together, they create our response. And this is the action that results from being triggered. And that reaction, when we talk about anxiety, is most often avoidance. So your teen's going to start to avoid this awful emotion and thought associated with the trigger, just to work in a backwards venue there. So here's the cycle of anxiety. According to CBT, anxiety is this situation or this trigger that starts our stress response. Oh my God, I'm being threatened. So we avoid it. We don't want to feel uncomfortable anymore. And it's best to avoid it because you know what? When I avoid going to school for this short period of time, it actually feels good. And I get this sense of relief. Oh, I avoided making a fool out of myself today. But that's only temporary because the next morning when it's time to wake up and go to school, this is actually creating a longer term and bigger fear. Oh, now I'm really going to make a fool out of myself today. So when that gets really hard to reinforce and redirect our teens, so again, that this avoidance actually causes this relief, which trains our bodies to think it's good, but it's not. It actually creates a longer term concern and issue. So when we talk about the cycle of anxiety, what we really want to do for our teens is interrupt it. In therapy, when we work with avoidance, there's multiple approaches that we can use. And in the context of therapy, working within what we call kind of like a Goldilocks approach, where we test the waters and see how much can we expose our teen to what they're being triggered by, is not too much and not too little, but how much is just right. And then we expose them to that little bit of fear or a little bit of that trigger, and then pull back and feel successful. So we get rid of this short-term relief and replace the long-term growth with a new message saying that we can do this. We don't need to avoid it. So finally, how can we help? I hope, first of all, that kind of makes sense. But, to help our teens, we want to encourage healthy routines. We can do this through modeling. One really kind of beginner level activity I've done with parents and teens is to use something like an anxiety thermometer to communicate between the two of them. So as the parent, you can use this to check in, or even as a discussion piece, show them and what does it mean when you're a 2, when you're fine? How do you feel in your body? What are you doing when you're at 2? Or holy, you got to it, your anxiety can get to a 10. How does that feel? What is that like for you? And really explore it with your teen. What does that mean to be a 6 or a 7? And then use it to check in, in the mornings or afternoons after school or at the dinner table. Where were you on your thermometer today? How did things go? Were you able to get or stay to a 4, or did things get really bad for you today? And then have that conversation. Be open to hearing what they have to report to you about it. Again, we can do this relaxation response training, like progressive muscle relaxation, breath work, meditation, grounding exercises. We want to help them gain awareness. Again, this self-monitoring. So if they're not checking in with you about it, perhaps they could still be checking in with themselves, or a trusted teacher at school, somebody, even a school counselor maybe, or even just in a journal so that they are aware of what their numbers are and where they're at. Obviously, counseling to do that cognitive restructuring, do a little bit of that exposure piece and start talking about and questioning their thoughts. Often our teens don't base their thoughts, like we learned about their brains, they're not basing their thoughts in a rational, logical sense. They're basing them off of emotions. And one little key fact I love to tell everybody is that your thoughts aren't facts. They're just not. Even us as adults, our thoughts aren't facts. So we can often question them and challenge them into just making sure that we're grounded and basing decisions off of our rational, logical brain, the front part of our brains as well. Another really important way we can help that I think often gets overlooked is checking their basic needs. Are they sleeping well? Are they eating properly? Are they getting enough water? How much screen time are they on or using every day? Which is, I don't know about you guys, but it seems impossible right now, especially with them coming home to be online at school. He's on the computer all day. Even when they were at school, he was on computer all day. And then he comes home and wants to chat with his friends on the computer or play video games, or it seems kind of impossible to monitor screen time nowadays. But still making sure that there is a balance is important. Social media can be a big one. And checking in with them at school. How are they feeling with this new change? How are they adapting? What do they need? Are there skills that you can help with? And then obviously my last point here, empathize with them. Don't judge or try and solve. This is the big one as parents. We think we know best. We want what's best and we just want to help. But it's important to empathize and be really good listeners at this age. Because your teens need that. They want somebody who's going to listen and not always just try and provide that answer. So I did have a really short video on empathy. I can see now we're at 45 minutes. So maybe this is the video that you guys have already seen or not, but I think I'll probably just end it there so that we can enter into any kind of questions or something to review. And yeah, I hope that was helpful. I hope that it provided a little bit more information and give you some insights into how you can help your teen and support them with their anxiety.
Oh, that was wonderful, Courtney. Thank you very much. I'm just looking at the questions here. Actually, first, maybe I'll say goodbye to anyone who maybe can't join us for the Q&A today, and just thank you for spending part of your evening with us, and just remind you that you are always welcome to join us for our webinars. Take care.